murder of Randy Stone shocks the suburban town of Independence, Missouri. Randy and Teresa Stone, married almost 20 years, are apparently as happy and God-fearing a couple as you might ever meet. One horrible afternoon, Teresa Stone's life changes forever when she finds the body of her husband slumped on the floor of her own office.
And I noticed he wasn't breathing, but I didn't want to touch him.
That's fine.
Scared.
One of the things police ruled out immediately was suicide. There was no gun found at the scene.
In fact, police do find a gun at the scene, but it's Randy Stone's work gun, and it hasn't been fired.
And you said he has this one small gun. Okay, we found that.
You did?
Yes. No other guns?
No.
Okay.
They also find a hunting knife, but it too has no connection to the crime.
Police rule out robbery as a motive because there's money left on a desk in the office.
Randy Stone also had his wallet in his back pocket. So a robbery seemed out of the question.
Given the position of the body, it seems evident that Randy was killed not by a stranger, but by someone he knew.
They thought from the beginning that whoever killed Randy Stone was probably someone that he knew. They just didn't know who.
But evidence so far is scanty. There's no unusual fingerprints, no muddy footprints, and no murder weapon. But what police do find is a shell casing lying on the ground near Randy Stone's body. And with a little forensic work, a shell casing can tell you a lot.
It appeared Randy had been shot with a .40 caliber.
During their investigation, police check the phone in Randy's office and find something interesting.
Early in the investigation, police learned that the first number that Teresa Stone dialed after finding her husband's body was not 911. It was her parents. They tell her to call the emergency number, and she does, but the question remains, why didn't she call an ambulance right off the bat?
Of course, in a stressful situation, a person might behave in ways that seem odd later on, but it did raise a small flag.
Detectives delve deep into their 8-hour interview with Teresa Stone, and cracks in the facade of her marriage appear quickly.
No affairs on the side or anything like that?
No.
He hasn't had an affair with someone? And just be honest with me.
Several years ago, he did.
Okay.
But that was right after we got married.
Okay.
That was a long time ago.
And it didn't cause any friction that
No.
you guys were wanting to get separated?
No,
or
no.
you never had to leave the residence or anything? No one left the residence or anything?
No, never.
Investigators collect every instance of conflict Randy Stone has in his life, but there aren't many.
Randy Stone had been keeping the books for New Hope. And early in Pastor Love's tenure there, Randy discovers $30,000 missing from a missionary fund.
He was upset about the finances and the way that the finances were being handled. And that was no secret.
Pastor Love is asked to account for it, but angrily denies any wrongdoing. It must have been difficult for Randy to bring it up in the first place, given how much admiration and respect he had for the pastor. And soon, Randy's trust in Pastor Love is regained to the point of having him counsel the Stones when their marriage runs into trouble. That's the sort of person Randy is, a religious man inclined to forgiveness.
Well-liked as he is, Randy Stone's funeral is a crowded affair. Friends, family, clients, and well-wishers. And there are a number of additional guests as well.
That day, members of the Independence Police Department were in that church, and they recorded the stirring, beautiful eulogy delivered by Pastor David Love.
You see, there's nothing more that we can do for Randy Stone. Nothing more we can do for him. He'll never have another thought in this body, another emotion, another hunger, pain. He'll never be able to sign another policy or kiss his wife on this side of glory. Randy Stone's name was on the sign over his office, Randy Stone Insurance Agency. How many here really know that Teresa was the agent of that place? She was the cement and the glue, wasn't she?
At that point, they weren't sure who was involved in the murder, but they thought it was likely that the murderer would be inside that church. And of course, it turns out they were right.
But everyone Randy Stone knows is in the church today. So who is the killer?
Investigators don't yet know who killed Randy Stone, but when the ballistic reports come in, they at least know what type of gun killed him.
It appeared Randy had been shot with a .40 caliber. The casings from the gun were on the floor, and those were collected as evidence.
Investigators know that Randy Stone likes to target shoot, and they also know how statistically likely it is for someone to be shot with their own gun. So a trip to one of Randy's target shooting ranges seems warranted.
They were able to take some shell casings from one of the shooting ranges that he frequented, and those shell casings from his gun matched the casings at the scene where he was shot and killed.
Spent bullets and casings are as individual as your fingerprint. They're compared under a split-screen microscope by forensic experts to determine whether they came from the same gun.
It turns out those shell casings ended up matching Randy Stone's own .40 caliber weapon.
We know that Randy was killed with his own Glock. We went out to your house, or your parents' house, and got shell casings, okay? From when he used to target shoot.
The discovery that Randy Stone was killed with his own firearm raises a number of critical questions and gives the investigation an intensely new focus.
So how does Randy Stone come to be shot with his own gun? This is a key question in the investigation. An entire prosecution will rest on it.
You have to remember, Randy Stone was a Marine. He was also a gun enthusiast, and everyone around him said he never, ever would have turned his back on anyone in that office that he felt was a threat. It wasn't in his nature. He was a Marine.
I want to know how anybody could get into that office, get that Glock, and shoot your husband. Because we're talking about the former war guy, the Marine. How would anybody get that gun away from him?
I don't know. I have no idea. I keep asking myself that all the time.
Marines follow very strict code on firearms handling. During training, there's a very strong emphasis on marksmanship and weapons handling. They practice weapons handling and dry firing for weeks before they ever shoot a live round. They're taught to secure their weapon, to always know where their weapon is, and to never turn their back on someone who might be their enemy. You get that training like Randy Stone did, and you have it for life.
The man who killed your husband had the gun already. There's no way you could have got that gun away from your husband.
Investigators now discover a new piece of evidence that sends the case ricocheting into yet another surprising direction.
One of the biggest pieces of evidence was in a trash can a couple of feet from Randy Stone's body.
Ex-Marine and insurance agent Randy Stone is murdered in a case that has all of Independence, Missouri abuzz. And although the gun that kills Randy has disappeared, ballistic evidence indicates that the weapon has been owned by Randy himself. Now, newly discovered evidence is about to turn the case on its head.
So detectives, as they're going through the office looking for evidence, look in the trash can feet away from where Randy Stone lies dead. And in that trash can, they find a discarded love letter. And it wasn't crumpled up. There really wasn't even any real attempt to destroy this letter. It was in about 9 pieces. It took some Scotch tape to put the letter back together. This was very clearly a love letter from someone to Teresa Stone.
Initially, in speaking to detectives, Teresa had admitted that her husband had engaged in extramarital affairs. Teresa's urge to highlight her husband's wrongdoing is in fact a common prelude to confessing her own indiscretions. She has to build that little mound of moral high ground before exposing herself. There's no doubt that Teresa is committed to her Christian faith, that she's earnestly dedicated to the church. But human nature is such that the lineaments of dedication, of loyalty, of love can become blurred. And this is part of what happens to Teresa.
Police, over several hours of interrogations of Teresa Stone, finally start getting her to admit that this was more than just a secret admirer, that in fact she had had a 10-year love affair with Pastor David Love.
Your extramarital relationship with David lasted about 10 years.
Yeah.
During
It got stronger as the years went on.
So it started off as a, what type
Just
of
like,
relationship?
you know, close friends, good friends, you know,
Then it grew to what?
sexual love.
Love. So you guys fell in love.
Yeah.
So we now know this was not an affair that lasted 6 months or a year. They had been seeing each other for almost 10 years.
Where would you guys normally meet when you guys were going to be sexually involved?
Well, we never planned it. When we were deeply involved, I mean, of course I would call you when Randy would leave, you know, and if I knew he was going to be gone for, you know, an hour, then he would come to the office if it was convenient for him.
So we're talking your office?
Yeah.
Farmers? Your home?
Yes.
His home?
Twice. It was harder there.
In his office? The church?
Yes.
Kim Love notices her husband receiving texts on unfamiliar-looking phones. Her suspicions are aroused, and she soon finds her suspicions are justified.
It turns out Kim, the pastor's wife, found several burner phones in their home. The kind of phones that don't have a name attached to them, the kind of phones that are very difficult to trace. And she didn't just find one phone. She found multiple phones in the home. And those phones, we now know, were used between Pastor Love and Teresa Stone to conceal their 10-year affair.
Teresa claims that matters come to a head about 2 weeks before the murder on St. Patrick's Day, when David Love and his wife show up at the office.
Pastor walked in, and Randy said, Pastor, I really don't have anything to say to you. I really don't.
This is when the secrets come out. There's no doubt about the affair between Teresa and David. And now, David Love wants to talk about Randy's own past indiscretions with other women, and more recently, with pornography.
He starts talking to him about his internet problem, you know, his pornography problem, his, you know, stuff like that. And Randy said, that's all behind us. You know, we've gotten over that.
This is all stuff he and the Stones had talked about in their counseling sessions. And to bring it up now just compounds the betrayal. Kim Love, who has long suspected her husband, is just plain angry.
Didn't you and the wife have words up?
Yeah. I told her that she wasn't a very good wife, pastor's wife.
Investigators soon uncover more of Teresa's strange activity on the day of the murder.
And one of the admissions that investigators gently pry from Teresa is that after the discovery of Randy's body, she went to the bathroom of a local rental car agency and destroyed the burner phone that Pastor Love had given her.
After you found your husband, you left the crime scene to go to the bathroom, and while you were there, you destroyed a phone. You know what that looks like?
I know.
How are we gonna explain that?
Not the actions of a completely innocent person.
On the day after Randy's murder, Teresa has a conversation that strikes investigators as strange.
Detectives knew that she had been asking a lot of questions about Randy Stone's life insurance policies. Even in the day after her husband's murder, she was asking about the life insurance policies, which seemed very odd for a grieving widow less than 24 hours after her husband's death.
Pastor Love's behavior had been odd as well. The very day after Randy Stone's body was found, the pastor gets a call from an old friend who asks him how he's holding up after the death of a friend and congregant. Like a river glorious, David Love says, quoting the title of an old and cherished hymn. In interviews, detectives repeatedly refer to the idea of confession being good for the soul. They know that, say, in Catholic culture, confession occurs in a small chamber in virtual secret, while other strains of Christian belief, including Teresa's, hold that confession, like faith itself, ought to be shouted from the rooftops. But Teresa's faith has been exploited by Pastor Love.
He kept throwing Bible verses up at me, and what other Bible characters did in the Bible, and how they murdered and God still blessed them and stuff like that. And I was like, and I kept telling him, I'm like, that was then. This is now.
And in the interrogation room, Teresa Stone is finally circling closer to the truth.
You told your parents specifically that Randy had been shot. You told a 911 operator you think he might have fallen. You never told him that he had been shot. You kept that to yourself. When you talked to the ambulance dispatcher, the person who needs to know what's going on there medically, you never told him that he'd been shot. If somebody told you that he was shot because you knew he'd been shot, and you didn't want us to know that.
He sent me a text and told me.
Who did? Say it.
Brother Love.
Brother Love.
He sent me a text and told me not to go to the office.
Teresa finally recognizes this man for what he is.
He said that he would kill for me. He said, I will do anything for you.
Police have no shortage of questions for Teresa Stone. Why had she destroyed her phone the night of the murder? Why had she been so concerned with Randy's life insurance? And why hadn't she called police immediately on learning what David Love had done? But for now, Teresa is happy to incriminate David Love while maintaining her own innocence.
I am not going to protect him anymore.
Finally, investigators have something close to confirmation of the killer's identity. But their suspect, it turns out, has left town.
Randy Stone had his suspicions about his own wife.
They learned the shocking lengths to which Pastor Love was willing to go.
It's no wonder that Randy never saw it coming.